Hi and welcome. It's Peg, and today on Art Joyous Sharing, which is my sister channel that I share with Shell C, we were talking about die cutting. Shell made a few things, and I was just talking about the differences in machines and die cuts and that sort of thing. So, let me walk you through what we were doing. Initially, I was talking about the Vagabond, which is this machine from Sizzix. Now, this is an electronic machine. I like it because I have issues with my shoulder and my hands, and crank machines are a little bit difficult for me. So I prefer an electronic machine that will feed the dies through. And I'm showing several different types of dies here. These are the thick steel rule dies, and they cut through multiple layers of product, whether it be wood or fabric or cork or, any kind of material, you can pretty much cut out with these steel ruled dies. And if you're doing a big project, you can do multiple layers at a time. Here I'm using some fabric, and I'm going to put some chipboard on top of that to show you, how many layers you can actually cut using steel rule die. Now, there are some issues with them. Some of the smaller places where the foam is get compressed, and I'll show you some answers about how to deal with that later. But you can see it's cutting through that stuff like butter. So you're going to need to use a pick to take those little pieces of paper out of the foam, because the small areas like that where the paper gets stuck are where you have the worst problems with those particular dies. It'll still cut, but you have trouble with paper getting stuck down in those areas. Now that is a little prism from Spellbinders. It's a very small, very compact die cut machine, good for being mobile. And then this is the fold out machine from Sizzix. This is a manual machine. So I'm just showing several other options that are available to you. I think Shell has a Prism also, but I'm just showing how I cut things and gather them and put them aside for later. Now, this particular die is what they call a Sizzlet, and one of the things that I like to do with them is to cut the paper that already has the adhesive on the back of it. And if you're doing something like this that has letters, you want to make sure that you're putting the paper with the correct side facing the die, so that when you tip it back over, you can read what you're cutting out and that the stickum is on the back. So the whole thing with die cutting is getting the correct sandwich. And for each different type of die you have, the sandwich is different. So I'm showing the different shims that there are, showing, for thin dies, for these sizzlets, for the big dies, um, for embossing. We're talking about all of those things. And when you emboss, you need to use a different mat than you would for cutting, and you need to use a rubber mat to push the die into those areas where the impression is. So here we go with the first cut. You see the paper is upside down, and I'm going to flip it over, and you can see that it's pulling up, and I've got a sticker now to use on my project. There are a lot of alphabet dies, and if you're doing sayings or words, that sort of thing, there are a lot of really fancy words and dies that you can use for card making. The one I'm pulling out now is a very decorative die, and we also have these open dies. So depending on whether or not you have a very decorative die or an open die, you want to think about the sandwich that you're using to make your die cut. Now these decorative ones are going to take a little more work, and I have this metal shim which is going to help with doing a fancy cut like that. If you're doing an open die, you can just use your regular platform that you would use for those open dies, but I like to add this other shim on the bottom if I'm going to be cutting into something that needs more cut. Now, I layered that wrong. The paper should have been underneath the die cut instead of the other way around, but it all turned out okay. I'm going to flip it over and cut it again and get a better cut. And then I will put it through with rubber mat and what do they call that? It's a black mat that they use when they're doing the embossing part on these particular dies. There we go. So you can see that needs to run through there. I'm getting my sandwich ready. Don't quite have it right yet. There we go. Going to run that through. And now you can see as I lift that, we're going to get that embossed area. Now it's hard to see, so I'm just going to grab some ink and ink that up so that you can see where the embossing has happened around this particular frame. So that's a very decorative die. The reason I don't use the additional metal shim with the open dies is because it sometimes can warp those open dies. They're very fragile because they have the opening in the middle. And so I just use a regular cutting plate on the bottom, and they are etched metal that just has this little rim around the edge. And I'm going to run those two open dies through at the same time. And I get my little ruffled circle and my other circle. And you can see the difference between those and the very decorative dies. So the very first company that I ever bought dies and machines from was Sizzix. I had been looking for a company that produced a die cut machine that would handle any kind of die from any company, and Sizzix was the first one that came up with something that would work for that. I've had just about every kind of die cut machine that there was on the market, and I've tried out any number of them, and I find Sizzix to be consistent in quality and have used them for many, many years. I have had the Spellbinder machine. It's also a fine machine, but I think I've just been loyal to Sizzix from the start. Uh, they've always come through for me. One of the things that I regret is that I think they've stopped making a lot of the steel rule dies, which is what I'm doing here. These steel rule dies, when the foam goes bad on them, you can kind of keep them going by putting tape over the top and just running that through and die cutting, and then it protects the foam underneath. So I'm cutting out this bird cage and bird of the steel rule die. Now, steel rule dies are going to be more expensive than your thin dies because there's more work involved in producing them, but they can be used on more surfaces. If you notice, I'm going to get heavier material here. This is some grunge board that I've had in my stash for a long time, And I'm going to cut that out of grunge board and get some more dimension behind that bird cage. And if you're doing anything where you want dimension, you're going to want steel rule dies to do that with. Now, if you're interested in any of the products and things that I'm using here today, I do have an Amazon store listed below, and you can go there and look at die cut, and I have a number of different things in that store. Plus, if you want more information about Sizzix itself, check out their website. I'm showing right now a magnetic die, die platform because that was another innovation that they came up with. This is a metal shim, so you can use a metal shim for those things that are hard to cut. I know that there are a number of dies on the market that are a little more difficult to cut. Some of the ones coming from Asia are not always the best cut, and you have to do multiple cuts. But this is an older version of the metal shim. It's called a chrome precision cutting plate and works very well with those intricate dies. Now this is a die that has a magnet in the bottom, and it's made to cut a tag out, but you can also use it for those die that are made to cut out in a small form that can be inserted inside of another die. Here's a whole box of those. These are known as movers and shapers, and so you can move them around, put them in different positions, add them to an already cut die cut, or you can cut them individually and use them that way, but you'll need a base plate. They have to have a base plate to carry them to get them to the right height to put them through the die machine. So here's a base plate, and you can move them around, or you can put them in the middle of these other dies that cut shapes and cut out an additional shape within these magnetic shapes. This is a journal that I made with a die that cuts out journals, and there are all kinds of shapes and dies. Most of the journals are extra large steel rule die, so that it'll cut right through cover material, leather, fabric, all of that sort of thing. So you can find just about anything you're looking for if you're looking for a die cut. So I'm showing the newest member of the Sizzix family, which is this real portable hand crank Sizzix machine. It folds out kind of like the Cricut did. The Cricut is no longer being produced, and this is a good substitute if you're looking for something like that. But here's a little bag, box, whatever you want to call it, die that I'm cutting out using one of those steel rule dies. And now I'm going to cut a flip card. This is one of those that has the magnetic center, so you could cut something out of that flip piece, but you can see that this will just open and close. These types of dies make building greeting cards very easily, and very easy, not easily, excuse me. And it's a little bit more interesting than just a standard fold over. So now I'm pulling out some heart shapes. This is some more of that sticky back paper, and I'm just going to cut several layers because when you're doing the steel rule dies, you can do that. And so now I'm creating sticker hearts. These can be stamped on, used in a lot of different ways. I'm just going to produce some interesting pieces that can be used in cards, journals, scrapbook pages, whatever you want to use them for. And I think I'm going to use one of these as a stencil because, yes, these die cuts can be used as stencils also. So you can see I've got 3 different images. You can also use the cutouts off of those for further enhancement on cards. Sorry, I have several things going on here today. I have guys working construction on the outside of my house, and I have a husband in the hospital, so keep getting phone calls, and it's interrupting my train of thought here. But I'm showing how this handle flips around and is easily carried with the carrying handle, and it's lightweight and a very convenient die cut machine for travel or whatever you're doing. So I decided we're getting close to the end of the show. I decided I was going to go ahead and decorate this little bag die cut. And I'm going to start with some ink and put that on the side of the bag using a stencil that I die cut. And I'm going to get out some Seth Apter Wow embossing powder and just put a little bit of that on there. Since the ink is still wet, I can do that and heat set. First I have to plug in my tool, get that going and get that heat set. I love the color of this embossing powder. Then I'm going to add a little more ink to that die cut and I'm going to just layer that up. Cut it down, glue it down to the front of the bag. This is some glue that's about ready to dry up, so I want to make sure I get it working and squeezing out okay, and then I'm going to grab a baby wipe to get any excess glue that may have migrated to an area where it doesn't belong. And then I'm going to take one of those sticker pieces that we created earlier and glue that down. And then I'll just wrap my little bag around, put some red line tape on the edge, and we'll have a little bag that you can put some die cuts into to gift to some of your friends. So that's about it from Shell and me for today. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you are new to my channel, please consider subscribing, giving it a thumbs up, sharing, liking, all that stuff that is important to help a channel. And remember to check out the box below. The description box has all the information about die cuts and things on Amazon store. And go and check out Shell's video because, you know, she's my partner and she was playing with die cuts today too. So thanks for stopping by and I'll see you again soon. Bye guys.